Well, welcome in everybody. I am Steel Agent Kyle if you are new here, and I am joined with some amazing people. If you've been on this channel before, you've probably have met Husky, but then I also have an amazing friend of mine, Dr. Patrick Ewell, a psychologist, a tenured psychologist at Kenyon University who has done some research that we want to talk about today. But Patrick, since you're new here, why don't you give a little bit of an introduction for us?
Uh, everyone, thanks so much for taking an interest in my work. It's the greatest compliment for a researcher. We toil away in the shadows, clicking and clacking on our laptops and not knowing if anyone's ever going to read what we write. So thanks so much for taking an interest in what I got going on. I am a professor, associate professor at Kenyon College, study media psychology, video games, etc. I have since I started graduate school. This is my 10th year kind of as a researcher. Yeah, and I'm super excited to be here, talk about Pokemon and science at the same time.
That's a pretty cool intersection that you get to, every day you get to kind of bring those two things together. And Husky, I wanted to bring Husky in. If you are unfamiliar with Husky's YouTube content and just general social media presence, she is very focused on bringing maybe not necessarily an exact science, right? From it's not she's not publishing Pokemon work, but she takes a very scientific approach to her content. So I thought Husky would be an amazing person to bring along for this ride. But Husky,
Thanks, Kyle. You flatter me. I do research as well, so I totally get the people taking an interest in things that I do is like the biggest thing ever. But I'm a PhD student. I do engineering education, so we kind of intersect with psychology. I don't do research in games, but I actually have one of my close friends does research in game-based learning and engineering. And I'm pretty sure we had come across one of Patrick's papers before because we were trying to find papers to bet each other to put in our dissertations. Like, if you can get this paper in your dissertation, like, just see if you can get it. I think there was one paper on furries that they wanted to try to get me to put in my dissertation. So, that's the, like, I don't know, my little bit of background. I have a history of reading into game-based learning, specifically in engineering, but my research isn't in it. But I make a lot of content that includes research. And I also love Pokemon and science at the same time.
I mean, it's a great intersection, right? I mean, real life Pokemon professors. I mean, that's pretty cool. But wanted to
what
get
did they win? Ender asked, what did they win? And honestly, I don't know.
We had a similar bet. Honestly, I don't know if you know this or not, but other PhD students have been running this bet for a long time. Ours was trying to figure out how to get a paper about giving cocaine to bees into our dissertations. Only one of us was successful.
Only one of us.
I'm wondering if you were the successful one. I'm starting to believe.
Not. My advisor sniffed that out. Get it?
There was some words also that we tried to get one of my friends to put in his dissertation. I forget exactly what they were. Potentially, one of my friends might be able to tell me. I think one of them was walloped. They had to put walloped in his dissertation. So we we have to make we spend so much time sitting behind the screen playing with numbers that we have to try to. Oh, it was walloped in bananas. Yeah, there she is. Walloped in bananas.
Walloped easier than bananas.
Jeff had to put in his dissertation. Yeah. So, yeah, we spend a lot of time sitting behind the screen playing with numbers and such, and we got to keep things interesting for things that aren't just the final product. Because we think it's interesting, but usually the only people that read it are people that need to cite it for their own stuff. So, it's fun to be able to actually bring it to different types of audiences, too. And Pokemon needs more science.
Honestly,
I read some papers how MOBA gamers are have higher visual motor skills than like the average population. So
it's actually
we're
true
already like
for MOBA gamers and for first-person shooters. So I have a whole lecture on this about for people who play a lot of video games. Basically, if anything appears from the side of the screen or the top of the bottom of the screen quickly, those people tend to have really excellent visual spatial skills because they practice notifying noticing novel objects in the peripheral of their vision, and that's where your vision starts to decay as you get older.
interesting.
So, yeah, there's a lot of very cool papers on that if you kind of dig deeper. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my Unite teammates might need to get on that because I don't know if they fit that exactly.
Oof.
But I think that they are the outliers in those studies, if I had to guess.
The difference is better than people who don't play games. Maybe not the best gamer, but better than people who don't play.
That's very true. So gamers, we're smarter than everyone else.
We're just better.
What
What I'm hearing is we're just better. We're just better. We're better than the average person.
I think we're just built different.
All scientists weep.
So, if you guys don't have if we're not egoists already, #1 strikers in the world. If we get the Blue Lock reference, if we're not already egoists, you should be, because we're better. Kyle is better in every way. Agree.
Gamers rise up. Alrighty.
Backwards hat Kyle, save me. Backwards hat Kyle.
Backwards hat. It's you turn the hat backwards and then you throw the Pokeball. That's what I learned from a very young age. Because that's when you get serious. So yeah. Backwards hat means I'm serious right now. So this is a serious night. We are talking about science. So let's get to it. So Patrick, we do want to go over. So you have 2 papers. So let's talk about them. The first one, and we're going to kind of maybe go in order of the paper. So we'll start with the first one, but talk to me about this one. So this one is titled Catching More Than Pocket Monsters, Pokemon Go's Social and Psychological Effects on Players. So walk me through, what made you, what this one's about and kind of where did it start?
So it started at a grocery store, honestly. I was standing out front of a grocery store when Pokemon Go was full on, 2016 summer, everybody with a phone was playing it. And I was just standing in front of the grocery store trying to catch Pokemon, and a guy walked up to me out of nowhere, didn't ask me my name, didn't say hello, didn't do anything. He said, "Hey man, there is a Ponyta over by the pool." And then he just left. And
I hope he's doing well.
I hope he's doing well. He started this all in order. And if that might seem like, a totally normal interaction to someone who plays Pokemon, but to a psychologist, it breaks a lot of the rules that we have for our regular day-to-day interaction. One of those is don't talk to strangers. Another one is if you're gonna talk to strangers, tell them what you're doing to be like, "Hey man, sorry to bother you," or "Excuse me," etc. But he didn't have to do any of that. He said a simple message to me. I knew exactly what he meant, and not only was I not creeped out, I was happy about it. Right?
Did you go get the Ponyta?
Of course I did. It was the first one. This was a Ponyta was a mystery. You
had we don't need all the we can cut out all that extra stuff. That psychologists say is the right way to interact with strangers. We can cut all that out when it comes to Pokemon Go.
Exactly. So I kind of immediately realized that there was something about this game that was different than other games, right? This game was causing me to be out in the real world. It was causing me to interact with people that I wouldn't normally interact with. And it was also causing me to have fun. And that was kind of the very basic, that's kind of how the study started. And I started looking around, and as people were playing the game, some research started to come out. But the thing that we wanted to do different was actually track people over time. So for 7 days. So a lot of times in psychology research, there are correlational studies where you just ask somebody, hey man, do you play Pokemon Go? And then tell us a little bit about yourself. And then we correlate those two variables and they see what they look like. But as anybody probably remembers from science class, correlation does not equal causation, right? So we wanted to track people over time for 7 straight days. And we asked them how much they play Pokemon. And then we asked them how much they exercised, how much they interacted with other people, and then we asked them about a few different psychological variables. And, sort of surprising, but also not surprising, was that a lot of these relationships were significant, and we could show that the more people played Pokemon Go, the more they were likely to move around, the more they were likely not only to interact with people they know, but also people they didn't know, and they felt more vital. They had more vitality. It's a term we use in psychology that refers to like how much energy you have. And then also, they felt more competent, meaning they felt more capable of doing things in their day-to-day life. So yeah, that's kind of the basic principle and premise of what we did.
Yeah, so the difference with this work and other work, because actually there is a good amount of research that looks at Pokemon Go, especially because it's such a different type of game. It was very novel at the time. So the difference with this one is it's longitudinal, or in a way longitudinal. So like other research, will have some players who play Pokemon Go do some type of survey. They ask them how much they exercise on any given day, and they're answering all of that at a single point in time. But the difference here is that these people in the study, these participants, were doing these surveys. It was surveys, right? Every single day for 7 days. And this one, I mean, you said that they had, you were looking at exercise, looking at a bunch of different psychological variables. I wrote them all down. It was time spent playing, exercise, social interactions, and social conversations, which are different, or they were categorized differently. The number of friends that they're interacting with, the number of strangers they're interacting with, their overall life satisfaction and vitality, which you already explained. So research had already given reasons for these variables to be studied in the first place. So that's why they are there. Because we can't just decide, like if we're doing research, we can't just be like, oh, I want to look at this because like I think it has an effect. It might, but you have to have a reason to do that, and a lot of times it means other literature has started to explore it or has called for that to be explored. So already we think that these things might have some sort of relationship with Pokemon Go, but now we're doing it in a different way in this study. So it's a lot of variables, which is hard to measure, and this is where it gets fun for me personally, because I don't have to do it, but I can look at it. The way that it's analyzed, in this study is with multi-level modeling, which is a very complicated statistical method. And overall, and correct me if I'm wrong, but overall the concern is looking at if time spent playing the game affects or has validity evidence to suggest that it has an effect on some of these other variables. So it's a correlation kind of measurement, but
yeah, it's like
more
a super
complicated.
correlation.
Yeah, like yeah, super correlation. I'm gonna.
Should I pull up the graphic now? Is this
Oh my
time?
god, yes, graphic.
Alrighty.
Please.
This one, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Look at that one.
Cool thing, I'll spare everybody the math for multi-level modeling, because I don't even know it all myself. But this graph illustrates kind of why this type of analysis is important for overtime effects. So imagine that the red dots, the green dots, and the blue dots are all different people. So you'll notice that if we're looking at this and say, that this is a graph for vitality over time, right, over the course of the study, you'll notice that the blue person starts lower than the green and red person, right? And the red person is higher. So the red person is naturally more vital than the person in blue. What multi-level modeling can do, the first great thing it can do, is it can associate all of those different readings to the person that it's being read from. So it understands that this is this person's average level of vitality, and this is how it is different from day to day. The second thing that it can do is look at the change from day to day to day to day to day, right? Say this is a 7-day study. Say on Wednesday something really bad happens to that person, right? They're going to feel really down and really vital, and it's got nothing to do with how much they played Pokemon Go. MLM can seek out stuff like that and understand, okay, our vitality reading for Wednesday was really low, but it doesn't seem correlated with playing Pokemon Go. So we're either going to exclude it or ignore it or just kind of factor it out, what we would call control for it over the course of this. So times this graph of 3 times 50, right? And that's how many, 40-ish something. Can't remember the exact number. I know that's terrible. But that's how many people we had in the study. So MLM is like a super correlation across time. So while it's not a perfect experiment showing causation, it does give us temporal precedence, which is a fancy word for we know one thing's happening before the other. So we can look at time spent playing Pokemon on Monday and vitality on Tuesday, and then time spent playing Pokemon on Tuesday and vitality on Wednesday. So not only can we differentiate from person to person, but we can also differentiate from day to day. And it allows us to be much more confident in our results than just saying, hey, these two things are correlated, so they might be related. We can be pretty confident that the gameplay is driving this effect.
Yeah, which, if I don't know how many people in the chat are familiar with like different types of statistical analysis, but correlation gives you kind of one measure of like these things might be related. And it tells you that they might be related, but it doesn't consider these confounding variables, which is another fun statistics word that I love to use all the time for no reason because it sounds like I'm smart when I say it. But, like Patrick said, that maybe something like happened to that person on a specific day and it affected the way they responded to the surveys. That is considered a confounding variable. It has nothing to do with the game. And usually, if you just wanted to do correlation, you can just put, number, like vitality versus time, and then it's like, oh yeah, has some sort of relationship. All we can say is that it has some sort of relationship, not that this relationship is causing that thing to happen. But multi-level modeling makes it a little more, it makes it controlled in the sense of being able to more confidently say that the relationship is being affected by specific variables that they're actually looking at, which is super fun. And what they actually ended up finding in this study was some specific interesting things, which I want to I have many like questions and discussion points about it. Doesn't correlation equal causation? Of course, and we all know that's true. But what they found, some of the most influential results was that the more time that players spent playing the game was related to more social interactions and conversations. So the more time people are spending on Pokemon Go, the more they're talking to others, both their friends and random strangers that they didn't know before. Also, more time spent playing the game was related to greater life satisfaction overall, which is another super interesting thing because why, like you're like, okay, yeah. What is it doing? And then that leads to that kind of discussion. But also, they saw that more time spent playing the game is not directly related to more exercise, which could be related to a bunch of different things, which we'll get to, because I have also plenty of discussion points about that. And also, the average amount of gameplay, when you take the time that they spent playing the game across the 7 days, it does not actually relate to any of those individual variables, which means that it's day to day, that everything that is found in this study is really based on a day-to-day basis. It's not that you can take the entire experience of someone playing Pokemon Go and equate it to these things happening. It's that day-to-day different situations or different experiences happen that have an effect on social interactions and life satisfaction, things like that. So it's really day to day and point by point, which is important when you think about longitudinal studies. Because if you're just looking at a single point in time, that doesn't get you what this study is going to get you. The longitudinal aspect is what did that. So hopefully I summarized that correctly, and Patrick, feel free to chime in with anything.
Yeah, just one thing to touch on is the only global result that we saw. So what Husky's kind of differentiating between is the day-to-day versus the global. We refer to that number as global. The global result that we did see was with exercise. So the more people play Pokemon globally, the more likely they were to exercise. However, you did not see that result from day to day. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting conversation to be had about like the difference between you're like, oh wait, the same study found one thing was correlated in one part of it, but not in the other. What does that mean? So it's really important to understand the difference between the different what we're looking at exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff there. I don't know if Kyle, you have any quick questions or discussion points to bring up on your end, because he's just been taking it all in, staring at the graph, mesmerized
I
by some
love this
multi-level
graph.
modeling. Yeah, it's
Look,
beautiful.
as Nickelback
Look
once
at this
said.
graph.
Exactly. Me and Ender shared a brain cell in that moment. We typed that at like literally the exact same time. That was
You
kind of
both
crazy.
came through, and the same number of A's.
Yeah, that
as
was
well.
that was a little weird that it had the same number of A's, but
I thought honestly that you copy pasted it real
no,
quick.
it went in like at the exact same time. That was actually kind of crazy. No, I think just like what were some of like the most interesting results, and then one of the questions from chat was, were there any results that surprised you from this research?
I was surprised to not see. So let me step back. I'll get to the surprise in a second. There was something that y'all mentioned earlier that I just wanted to circle back to real quick, and we write about this in the paper. Is like I understand a lot of these numbers can, for people that aren't really into statistics, can be hard to understand. So one thing we were careful to do in the paper is to give specific examples, and MLM allows you to do that. So I'm reading directly from my paper. We wanted to basically spell it out for people, like what happens with this association. So like for example, one of ours shows that an increase in 1 minute per gameplay resulted in an increase of 1% chance of talking to someone else. Isn't that cool? So like you could see a kind of a direct result of like the more people played per minute, the more this kind of odds ratio increased of their likelihood of talking to someone else. I was surprised that the exercise variable didn't show up from day to day. I thought for sure that's what would happen, and we know people were moving. The kind of the interesting thing that we found through we had some qualitative work that wasn't exactly included in the study, but we can kind of sift through what people were writing, is we don't think people were counting playing Pokemon as exercise. So like they were just counting it as having fun or doing whatever. So when we asked them how much did you exercise today, people would say 10 minutes or something like that. And then we asked them how much they played Pokemon today, they'd be like an hour. Right? And this was back at launch, right? When people were walking all over the place. So it wasn't like you could just sit there and do battles or get a remote raid or something like that.
Right.
So that was something that certainly surprised me. And then another thing that surprised me was specifically competence. So there are kind of 3 traits that we looked at that are supposed to be like what humans thrive on: competence, autonomy, and relatedness. I thought for sure we would see the relatedness variable moving around a little bit, and there's some analysis that shows we did. But this competence goal is something that's really interested in gaming because, one of the benefits of gaming in general is it allows us to achieve things kind of on a small scale and then build on it. So like, maybe we didn't have a good day at work, but we finally caught a shiny whatever, right? Or like maybe I didn't,
Real. That's so real.
and like maybe I didn't
Yeah.
maybe I didn't interact with my friends well, but we did finish that raid together or whatever, and I finally caught a Kyogre. You know what I mean? So like gaming allows for us to have these kind of little wins that make us feel like we're more competent, and research not involved with gaming just shows that when people feel more competent, capable of doing stuff, they're more likely to do it, and they're more likely to succeed at it. So
I should put a pin in that because I feel like, I mean, many of us are familiar with Kyle and I from Unite because I'm thinking about Unite in the back of my mind too.
Yeah.
And Unite does a great job at making players feel like they're good at the game. So a lot of not very good at the game players continue to play the game. With like sub 50% win rates, and you're like, why would they, but the game does a really good job at making you feel like you're rewarded for continuing to play because you feel like you're good and accomplishing things regardless, which is super interesting. Is that self-determination theory?
yeah, it is. It's a
Yeah.
self-determination theory. It's used.
I've done research on it. It was one of my early like undergrad research that I did with self-determination theory, and we like coded for those constructs, which was cool.
Very applicable to teaching and learning and knowledge. So the theory, doesn't do so great in some aspects, but it really shines in education, occupational stuff, and when you're trying to teach somebody something new.
Yeah, it comes up. It comes up a lot in my field. That and expectancy value theory of motivation. I like that one too. I like when theories have, this is totally not related. I love when theories have like different, like just a couple little like constructs that you can break them down into. It's so much easier for me to see it that way. I'm such a numbers graphics person, which is why the MLM graphs is so much fun. Which I also put in the chat that MLM I'm familiar with because it also stands for multi-level marketing, which is a scam. And
Oh yeah.
so I hear
Patrick's
MLM and
really a boss babe, and he's just waiting
Yeah,
to
he's
pitch
just a
us his
boss.
snake oil.
He's just a boss babe.
Nice.
I want to go back actually to when you said that like you were surprised about the exercise thing and that possibly like players aren't counting Pokemon as exercise, which I was thinking about this today because I basically strictly use Pokemon Go for exercise. At least anymore. I'm not as like focused on Pokemon Go as I used to be, like checking it all the time. But now that I'm thinking about it, when I was very into Pokemon Go, I would specifically play it to like meet up with friends, and I wasn't thinking about it in terms of how much exercise I was doing. But like this morning when I get up and I'm like trying to go for a brisk walk, I'm not really focused on Pokemon Go. I just have it like on, and my Pokemon Go Plus Plus is catching stuff for me in the background, and then I check, every couple minutes and like, oh, what did I get? What did I catch? But that is
Never check the
interesting
journal.
because
Never check the
like,
journal because there's always shinies there that you didn't catch. That's just a little tip.
no, I know. I never check. I never check if it like ran away. I'm always like, like I never want to see it saying that a shiny ran away. I would die.
It's the worst.
But so I was like, when you said that, that was kind of like, oh, that does make sense because when I'm not thinking about playing Pokemon Go if I'm exercising, but if I'm hanging out with friends who are playing, then I'm only thinking about playing Pokemon Go. So if you're supposed to be doing a study where you're like purposely going and meeting up with people to play Pokemon Go, then yeah, that makes sense, which it wasn't, I guess, as clear to me just reading the paper. So it's interesting that you bring that part up. Because, yeah, it's cool.
We might end up talking, we might not. I don't know how much time we have, but our new study that's not published yet, there's no paper yet. We tried to circumvent all that. And instead of asking people how much they exercised or moved around, we just asked their phones. And then we got their phones to tell us how far they moved and how far they didn't, or how much they played the game and how much they didn't. So we can kind of, there's a fair amount of research in media psychology that people are inherently terrible at reporting their media use, whether it be social media use, TV watching, whatever. People either way overestimate or way underestimate.
I'd underestimate, just
Oh,
but it would be
yeah.
on purpose because I'd be embarrassed.
Yeah,
A
same.
lot of people do that because they're embarrassed. But then a lot of people, the real problem that you run into is people often don't know what you mean. So like when we just ask people how much you exercise, they might not know what we meant, right? Because if you ask people, Facebook's, or I mean, I'll use an old example because Facebook, just because, but like there's like 10 different things you could be doing on Facebook. You could just be doom scrolling, you could be messaging someone, you could be on Facebook Marketplace, like you could be watching, Instagram reels on there. So like if you ask people like how much time do you spend on social media, are they thinking of all of those things and conglomerating into that time, right? The same thing goes with, playing video games. Like if I'm just cleaning my inventory, in my own mind, do I count that as playing Pokemon Go? Right? Or like if you guys are like idling before a match for Unite, like are you counting that as your video game time or whatever? So it's really interesting on like the way you ask a question causes things to be done differently.
Great question, Kelsey. Great question.
The sock trick. She asks, with the phone tracking piece, does that account for people that use the sock to hatch eggs?
So
Do you remember that? That was crazy, just swinging your sock around.
We had to come up with a cap for that study where basically like if we had to decide as a group what was a reasonable amount of distance someone could travel in a day while playing the game. And basically what happened is we just excluded entries that were like over 50 kilometers because we didn't think it'd be reasonable for a normal person to walk or to be doing that much in the game in a day.
So say it's like a marathon.
Yeah, like because we were thinking of like Go Fest, right? Like,
yeah.
At Go Fest I can walk like 20 kilometers, right? What is that, or what does that translate to?
Right.
So
I think I did 12 or something at Go Fest, and I was like, that's so much. Like,
I was gonna say,
forever.
Which one it was? I think one of the ones we went to in Chicago. I think we did about like 12 or 13 miles.
Yeah,
based on like
we did 12 or 3, we did like 26 kilometers for one of the Go Fest days in Chicago.
Yeah.
But we didn't want to exclude people that like might ride their bike. You know what I mean?
That's a good point.
Isn't the biking isn't it like in the app that you have to bike like a slower or something, or it doesn't count? Like the distance or the speed
if you go over
is
a
like
certain
really
speed,
sensitive.
Yeah.
I think.
If you go over a certain speed, it stops counting kilometers.
Driving too. Remember when driving like didn't count at first? Like it was like you could just drive with the app open. Wow, that was so Pokemon Go was my first Pokemon game ever.
Oh, really?
I never grew up playing Pokemon. Yeah. I knew nothing about it. I went to a graduation party or something. I was I just turned 17 years old. And I had went to a graduation party. And they were like
the oldest person alive.
I was 17 in 2016. So I just finished junior year of high school, and I was at a graduation party, and they were like, this new app just came out. It's Pokemon. And I was like, I don't know. Okay, like I've heard of Pokemon. Fine. They're like, just get it. And then we were all just like walking up and down the street. And then I'm the only one who continues to play it to this day. So
that's wild.
No one else. Everyone else fell off, and I didn't. I had my sister playing with me. I would make my dad drive us into like back alleys to get Pokestops. Like those were the times, honestly.
Those were crazy. Well, I think that's a good segue, right? So we talked about the psychological effects, and then a segue into your second paper. So talk to me. So this one's titled, "You Teach Me and I'll Teach You: The Role of Social Interactions on Positivity Elicited from Playing Pokemon Go." So this is like part 2, or is this like what
sort of
what
not my
started
part
this?
2, but it fits nicely in. So this research was already done by a team in Vancouver, and it was a bunch of clinicians who kind of stumbled upon Pokemon Go, and like some of their research team knew about it and some of them did not. And they actually saw me give a presentation on my first paper, and they brought me in to work on their project, because they had some results, but they weren't sure how to, I'm trying to think of the right word, like nest them into the literature, right? So like all the stuff that we're talking about before about like how this kind of fits into gaming, like um they were kind of lacking that lens a little bit, and they brought me onto the paper to kind of like help them situate their results and make them kind of fit into the existing Pokemon world.
Mm.
But
yeah, was this one?
go ahead.
So this one was after. This one did come after that first one.
Mhm.
Okay, I couldn't remember what the years were.
Yeah, so the data collection had happened, I think, in like 2020 or 2019. But the great thing about this study, so my study was just kind of descriptive, like we're letting people do their thing and we're just saying, hey, do your thing or whatever. This was an application of it. Like, okay, are these nice positive results happening just for people to play the game? And like if you made someone play Pokemon Go, would you get these similar nice results as well? So this is kind of a test of that idea, to say like, all right, you're gonna come and do this experiment and we're gonna make you play Pokemon Go. And we're gonna see what happens.
So like observation versus experimental type of like for this study they took, I wrote it down, 108 students, and they forced them to hang out with each other 8 times over the course of 2 weeks. So they actually designed an experiment, versus with the other study they were like, hey, do you just mind answering these surveys at the end of your day? Like, we just want to see what ends up happening. So yeah, there's still probably differences and things to consider even in an observation study, but in this one that there's going to be some form of experimenting, so the participants are actively thinking about the fact that they are performing in a study, like doing an experiment, which is so having different ways of kind of studying it and getting similar results is also something that really I don't want to say validates, because you're not supposed to say that, but provides a lot of validity evidence for some of the results that we saw. So with this paper, it was similar parameters to the last one, but some were different. So they were looking at specifically positivity and positive social interactions. They also were controlling for satisfaction with game accomplishments, which I'll have Patrick go into more depth on. They also considered the Pokemon Go level, which also has to do with just trying to control for where players are at in the game. They considered relationship closeness, and also dove into some depressive symptoms and social anxiety symptoms. So actually looking at some forms of mental health and actual positivity, which positivity is such a relative thing, but when you're looking at it, it was quantitative, but you're also looking at a very qualitative element. So I do qualitative research. So the fun thing about qualitative things like this is that whatever the participant says is real is real. So if the participant says this was positive, even if your definition of positive doesn't match their definition of positive, they feel that that is true, which is an interesting thing when looking at these types of parameters, because you just kind of have to go with whatever the participant says is correct, right? So yeah, this one was 2 weeks, and these participants were they just randomly given a partner?
They could bring it, so they could bring a partner if they wanted to. But they didn't have to. So if somebody came alone and signed up to the study, then they were partnered with a stranger, I believe.
Okay, so some people came in with like their bestie.
Right.
And some people signed up for the study, they didn't have a partner with them, so then the team paired them with someone that they might not know. So we're getting a lot of different perspectives here.
Right. That's why they mentioned controlling for relationship. So if they were super close, they kind of tried to set in the calculations. They tried to set that number to 0 when doing the analysis.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So basically, these participants, they met up and they played together for for 8 sessions. But before they actually met up and started the study, they filled out some questionnaires about their moods, and they took some surveys to kind of get a baseline for where they're at, and then talked about their relationship with the gameplay partner that they had. And then they continued to fill out these surveys as they were playing the game. And I wrote 3 points of the most interesting results, and then Patrick, you can also talk about results that you found interesting or important to talk about. We noticed the paper noticed that positivity slightly decreased across gameplay sessions. It was slight, but it was there. But more positive social interactions correlated with greater post-game positivity, which means after they were finished their session for the day and were reflecting on what had happened, if they had perceived more positive social interactions to occur during that session, then they felt better about it afterwards. So they were more positive after they ended for the day, which is interesting. And then I also put that players who were more depressed at the beginning, before they started to do this study and participate in these sessions with a partner, reported more increased gains in positivity throughout the duration of the study. So if you were not as good mentally in terms of depression or having depressive symptoms, then they actually increased more than players who didn't have as many depressive symptoms at the start. That was the one that was most interesting to me.
Yeah, and I think that's the real key to the finding, and I'll come back to the couple of the other ones in a minute, but if you dig deep into the clinical literature, you're a therapist, and somebody comes in and they says, I'm really depressed. What should I do? One of the things you're going to tell them is try to do something that you enjoy. The second thing you're going to try to tell them is to reconnect with your friends. And the third thing you're going to try to tell them is to go outside. Right? And Pokemon Go kind of does that, especially when you make people. And I think this was their way of saying, hey, can a clinical intervention make people feel better? And this result showed that not only is that true, but it's most effective on the people that need it the most. Right? Like what could, what result would you not, I mean, I don't know how it gets better than that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like if people were feeling really down and really blue, they are the people that saw the best gains from this. And it's not like, now keep in mind, like we always talk about this stuff in increments. And it's not like these people played the study and then they didn't feel depressed ever again. We just showed that them playing with a partner made them feel better. And that's pretty awesome. And it made them feel better than people that were feeling bad in the first place.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but before I forget, because I'm going to, it kind of aligns with what you'd expect from like a medical treatment or like a medical recommendation, right? Like if you take an antidepressant for depression, then it will help you more than someone taking an antidepressant and they don't have depression. Because obviously the person with depression is the one who needs it. It's the same with other things. The first thing that comes to mind is like if you are trying to lose weight, and you are very overweight, then if you simply eat less, the weight will come off quicker. And so, but like if you were not super overweight and you were trying to lose weight, simply eating less would not be as effective. So it's like the people that need the treatment more are the ones who are benefiting from the treatment more, which is like that's what it's for, So it's almost like, not that Pokemon Go like cures your depression, but like for those people, it's acting as something that helps them, like in the way that a medical treatment would, or like what a therapist would recommend, or like what a psychologist would recommend you do. It's like working in that way.
Yeah, and the great thing about this is an easy sell, right? Go play video games for 20 minutes with somebody else. right? Like
Yeah.
all the different ways that we try to treat things and stuff. It can be an easy sell to say, hey, why don't you go do that? Why don't you go do that thing that you used to like to do with a friend and see how it goes? Instead of like, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that, I got to go, I got to take this medicine, etc., etc. Um, and so I think that's pretty special. There's two other things I wanted to mention is again, you see the word in the abstract used, which is a great word for it, is incremental. Um, we can see through multi-level modeling that more playing with a friend, having a positive reaction, we get a direct incremental result in positivity and feeling good, right? We can see one thing and then we can see the other thing happening. That's really what we want to see. So, and the other thing there is a lot of times you see video game effects and you say, all right, this person plays video games, so we see thing A. But if we make them play more video games, we don't really see any change in A. We just see the relationship still. It's just still kind of there. With this, we can see the incremental growth. If they play more, they get more, right? And then just like on a quick note, you mentioned there's kind of a quirky finding in this of like positivity decreased over time. I just wanted to be clear that doesn't mean people got sadder over time. It
Yeah.
means that the effect became less so over time, right? So if they're getting, a +7, then the next time they got a +6, and then a +5, and then a +5, and a +5. So the basically the treatment, if you want to call it that, was most effective at the beginning and then kind of started to tail off. But it never like went negative. It's just I know you know that, but like
Mhm.
somebody's just listening, it might be
Yeah.
like,
It wasn't that
negative over time.
Eventually,
It wasn't that
Pokemon
few-
Go causes depression.
You use it in moderation because this is a dangerous drug.
Yeah, it's dangerous.
It kind of like I had jotted this down too for like a later discussion that kind of talks about both papers, but since we're talking about that now, something that I saw in the paper, which was an explanation for the potential reasons why this happened, was that players were getting used to the routine of doing the study and just kind of filling in the answer. Like, after a while, you're going to memorize the survey.
Yep.
And you know what the answers are. So I kind of put that in, like, just as a general discussion point about survey fatigue. Because in both studies, players were having to answer a lot of surveys. And they have to go log in and, and it's the same surveys. So they're answering the same things like every single day or, over the course of 2 weeks, the same surveys over and over. And I've done plenty of studies that try to do something longitudinally, and students hate it because they're like, I took this already and like it's so long, so like I'm wondering, I guess personally, how like survey fatigue could have potentially affected that. I think we see that here with the slight positivity decrease for sure, but I'd imagine that you can kind of attribute some of these results to like the students just cranking out the survey as fast as they can over time.
Absolutely. And like I alluded to our paper that's kind of the research is finished, but the paper's not done. We surveyed people 22 times over 14 weeks. So you can just imagine. And while there's definitely self-report bias and people kind of go through the motions, there are kind of some things that we can do under the radar that help prevent stuff like that. One of them is look for patterns and basically making sure people aren't clicking the same number over and over and over and over and over and over again. The
Yeah.
second thing is we ask people at the end of surveys, hey, did you put your best effort into filling out this survey? And we tell them, it's not going to affect how much, your compensation or anything like that. And if people say no, you just take it out. You just take that day out. Like it's easier that way than just saying like you better do it. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
just asking people like, hey, did you phone it in on this one? It's totally fine. We get it. Like this is a really long study. If you don't do them all, we'd rather you just tell us that like you didn't do it, or you just clicked 3 or whatever. A lot of times, you can use algorithms in Excel to sniff that kind of stuff out. So we also have what we call distractor questions, where the question says like, for the next question, check 4 no matter what. So if somebody's
Yeah,
just
we
ripping
do, we
through,
do that too.
yeah, somebody's
It's a
just
very
ripping
easy
through,
way to tell if they're not actually reading it.
Yeah. That's actually really
and
funny.
for the most part, most of these studies are almost always oversampled. So whatever you see the participant number is, there were more samples than that. And people got thrown out of the study for various reasons.
What
So
about if you don't have enough participants to begin with?
so
Because these had a lot of participants, and a lot of times people don't want to do a survey at all ever. They don't want to sign up. So sometimes you barely get any participants. So deleting some of them would mean that you can't get any statistical findings at all.
So this is a huge problem, especially with our last study where we were asking people to put an app on their phone and record this information. I don't know if you would guess, but people don't take that too well.
Yeah.
What?
The
If
way
they didn't want to do the survey, they don't want to put an app on their phone either.
the great thing about the longitudinal work is very difficult. The upside of that difficulty is having one person in a study for 2 weeks is awesome. It basically means you need less subjects to do this kind of work in the first place. So, normally if I'm doing some kind of experiment, I want like, a minimum of 100, if not 200 people if I'm doing like 4 different manipulations or whatever. But I only get to see them once, right? If I get to see one person 20 times, it allows me to, and the analysis allows me to tune out that variance that might come with each one of their entries. So, they're probably not faking it every day because they'd probably just drop out of the survey. You know what I mean? Like nobody's gonna fake it for 2 straight weeks on everything to get $20. You know what I mean? So
$20 is $20, man.
Yeah. I mean, you might be right.
I'd take the 20 any day.
But so my first study, or this study had, 108 people, 54 diodes. Like that's a low sample size in a study that's not longitudinal. But if you think of it like this, so if I have 108 or 108 people and I have 14 days, that number is now times 14, right? So now I have 1,400 data points. That's a lot of data points to work with. So it changes the math on. We start to look not so much as participants, but we look at how many data points we have total.
Yeah.
Love it. I love a lot of data, and unfortunately, my study has 17. So, which is
well, you're a qualitative researcher. It's fine.
My 17 is great for qual. My quant study, our dissertation, nothing to do with what we're talking about. I just enjoy talking about myself. My dissertation requires 3 studies, and my first study is fully quantitative. One is multi-method, and then the last one is qualitative. It's like my first study is a longitudinal one, and we had 200-something participants in the first year, and we have them do like a same survey, every year, and like twice a year or something.
Yeah.
And then by the 4th year, we just didn't have even enough data to like even do anything. There was like 200 something, and then like every semester it like slowly got less over time.
It happens so much. Like you have no idea. Like if you're watching this and you want to be into science, know that like X amount of stuff that you do is just not going to work. And it's not. That doesn't mean you did it wrong. It just means that's just that's what happened. And like I've done great studies that I thought were brilliant ideas, and they just didn't work out. And like holding on to longitudinal subjects is really, really difficult. I feel like we're drifting into a methods conversation, but it's true.
Yeah. Sorry for people that probably this is the researcher time to talk now. You guys just come back later. No, I'm kidding. I do have another question that we didn't get to yet about this paper specifically. And there was we talked about that they could bring a partner, or if they didn't have a partner, they were paired up with someone that they didn't know. What if they just didn't like the person they were paired up with? Like what happened? What happened
Totally
then?
fine question. People, I always call this is a great class question. Because people can all think of a person that they didn't like or they met and they're like, I don't like this person. First, the way that they tried to get around this with their study is they specifically asked about relationship positivity, or how pleasant or positive did you find this experience. So if you kind of read deep into the results, you can see that they use that phrase, and that's basically saying if people hated it, they weren't going to have a good time, right? That's just plain and simple. But the truth of the matter, and this is just practicalness of human nature, if I, the researcher, tell you to play Pokemon with this person, you're probably going to be, it's probably too socially awkward to be like, I don't like you. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
people tend to kind of, okay, I'll talk to this person and I'll interact with them and so on. And 95% of the time, the more you interact with somebody else, the more you like them. Now I know everybody can think of the person they interact with more and they don't like, but those people are outliers and they're infrequent. Like it's
Yeah. And also it's 2 weeks, right? Like
yeah,
how
Yeah,
much
it's
of a
not that long.
relationship are you really developing?
right. And like people talk about other stuff, and as soon as, to get really into the psych research, like as soon as you start talking about something else, you disclose information about yourself that immediately makes the other person like you more, usually.
Oh, so
So
me oversharing to everyone is literally not a problem. They like me more, in fact.
not usually. Like I said, the term is usually. So there again, we can all think of the people who are like, oh, that guy talks too much and they talk about themselves too much, et cetera, et cetera. But those people are outliers and it usually doesn't matter. So I'd say while it's a fair
Yeah.
worry, I would say it's unlikely.
So what we can take from this, I think, if you're not going to take anything else, take this. When you first meet somebody, immediately trauma dump, and they will like you more.
Is that backed in science, Patrick? Has there been
No,
science done on this?
but it's not backed in science either. So share a little. I would say throw them some bait and see what they bite on, and then you can share as much as you want.
That's Gemini are born with that skill. Me,
No.
Kyle and I, the Geminis in the room, we're born with that skill. Hi everyone, I'm fatherless. See, but Pina, the thing about fatherless girls is that it's grippier, and I'm not trying in the sense that
What?
I need a little sign that says science.
I need
not
help.
Sport. Science does not support any of the following conclusions.
oh yeah, Pina's a Gemini as well. See, we're born with the skill of giving a little bit and then reading the reaction and then seeing how much we can give. Or we're very good at that. We're always like we're feeding just a little bit to see if they're interested, and then like we're just seeing if they bite, and then we go in. That's what we do.
That's backed in science too.
No, don't get me started. Don't even do it.
I love astrology.
Nah,
As a science,
love it all you want.
I am a religious person who loves science and astrology. It's a combination.
It's one of the combinations.
It is one of the combinations of all time.
One of them, for sure.
So
did I answer? I think I asked all. I think we talked about all of the questions on this specific paper, Kyle.
I think so. Yeah, I think we did. So I guess some of the other things that I wanted to kind of pick your brain on. So what do you think that these studies told you, not only about just people in general, but like how do you think that what the findings of these specific papers tell you about other video games? What type of applicability do they have in other video games or in life in general?
Such a good question.
He said you did a good job, Kyle. Did you hear that?
It's the thing that is so interesting about Pokemon Go is you're kind of, if I were to make up a video game to try to emphasize the most positive things about video games, it would look very similar to this. The problem is when people try to make video games like that, nobody plays them. And I think one of the things that taught me about is like the answer can be very simple, that if we can get people just to do this one little thing, we can see at least some slight increase in positivity in their life. But not all games are like this, and they allow us to see it in parts, but not really. So, for example, Xer games like Wii Fit is a great example of this. People will play Wii Fit, they'll exercise, they'll feel good, they'll like it, and then they'll stop playing. Right? People will get those benefits, but they won't stick with it, and it won't hang out. Or MMORPGs. People will play them, they'll get these little competence boosters, feeling that they can do stuff, they can do quests, they can level their character, etc., etc. But then they can also play it 40 hours a week and run their life into the ground and see some negative consequences from it.
Sure.
So like Pokemon Go really taught me that there's kind of a lightning in a bottle aspect to video gaming, especially getting positive effects out of it, that even if you design the most world's perfect game to give all the best psychological effects, if you don't staple a Pikachu to it, like it might just sit on Steam and never get played by anybody for the rest of the time. So that's why I really appreciate this game, and I'm glad it didn't die, because if people remember, it was close to dying.
Everything is always close to dying.
And it's just so interesting. Like every time I look at this game, like I can't believe people actively play this game where there's so many psychological points where I could say, if I was trying to give you psychological advice, what would I tell you to do? I would tell you to do all of these things. So it's really interesting.
I mean, everyone complains about everything. So I've seen, plenty of people complain about Pokemon Go all the time. But it really is interesting how long it has lasted with such a huge player base.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like the events for it are still huge, and they continue adding new features that people like and use. And I think for sure, I think it was another one of my questions too, without stapling Pokemon to the game and having Pokemon lore, it probably wouldn't have been super.
Yeah, then it's
I mean, look at the other games Niantic put out. They're already dead. The Harry Potter one dead.
Pikmin Go, or
yeah, Pikmin one's dead. Yeah, they have like 3 or 4 other games that have just not.
Is the Minecraft AR game still alive?
I don't know. There was
Minecraft AR.
Yeah.
There was a Monster Hunter one that I think is still alive. But I think they're not the scale that Pokemon is. I mean,
I also think, now I'm merely speculating, but I don't think they have the team in place to constantly be making new things or whatever. So I think that's part of it. But yeah, I hope it never dies. It's not only for my research, but for people in general.
Yeah, so I guess the other question that I had. Grants, money, hello. Yeah, I guess the other question I had was, obviously you've had these ones. What other types of research, what questions are unanswered from these studies that you want to continue looking into Pokemon Go or even other Pokemon games? Like what do you have on on your radar for other topics?
So 2 big ones. The first is, when we factor out as much human subjectivity as possible, do we still see the results? And I can give you a sneak preview, and the answer is kind of yes. When we use objective measures of distance and objective measures of playing the game, we still see some nice effects. They're not quite as spreading as the previous ones, but we still see these social interaction effects, and we still see these vitality effects, which is really nice.
Hell yeah.
The second one, and the one that I've been thinking the most a lot and reading other papers, is how your motivation to play the game changes the effect that you get out of it. And a lot of times people think of, if I do A, I get B. But in psychology, we very rarely think about stuff like things like that, we usually say, all right, thing A happens. What happens in the middle that might lead to different outcomes? So that there's been a fair amount of studies not done by me that looks at the reason why people play Pokemon in the first place. Do they play it for exercise? Do they play it for nostalgia? Do they play it to escape a stressful life? Do they play it to hang out with their friends, etc., etc.? And what we're seeing is actually, um, and what other papers have found is that some motivations lead to positive effects, and some motivations lead to no effect, and some motivations lead to negative effect.
Ooh.
Right? So people who play games to escape or to try to forget about their problems and do it a lot, they actually tend to get negative effects, meaning like they're pushing their problems aside and ignoring them, so it's kind of making their life worse. Um, we've seen that people that play with the specific motivation to interact with their friends or to meet other people get really nice effects. Um, so this is other papers again, not my papers. But we have this data in our big giant data set. So we did the one we haven't really got too deep into was we had 100 participants tracked for 14 weeks through 22 surveys. So if you times all that together, it's a lot of data points, right? We haven't we haven't teased out all the motivational stuff, but that's kind of the next thing we're going to look at. And then the other thing we're going to look at is personality predictors. And then there are a couple of theories that like people are more open to experiences who play a game that forces them to go out and have new experiences are going to kind of get a compound effect. I mean, they're going to get kind of a double up, right? There's a term used a lot in psychology that's used otherwhere, obviously, is the rich get richer. So people who are super social and play a social game, they're going to get lots of social benefits from it. So we're curious to look at those differences in personality traits coupled with motivation to see who's getting these kind of nice effects that we see and who's not.
That's really cool. And that's not even just a Pokemon thing. That's just a video game thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like the age-old debate and conversation around aggression in video games or whatnot, you see a very tight and neat circle effect of aggressive people who are naturally aggressive tend to seek out aggressive video games and then they feel more aggressive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone who's not aggressive plays an aggressive video game, they don't feel anything from it because it's not part of their personality and who they are or whatever. So all this stuff plays a role, and we're just starting to kind of now pull it apart, or even have the data to pull it apart.
Yeah. So, I mean, your research is Pokemon Go specifically, but when you're talking about the reasons that people decide to play a game in the first place, do you think that it could translate to other games that aren't the style of Pokemon Go? Like Unite, for example, like if people are playing Unite and they're only playing when their group of friends is around and they can 5-stack, like do you think that those results would be seen?
1000%. Now the nature of Unite, it's going to be harder to get that effect, right? Because like I said, Pokemon Go is kind of stacking the deck by giving you outside, giving you friends, and giving you exercise, right? Reunite's only giving you one of those things. Now, a nice thing that Unite gives you that Pokemon Go doesn't is that kind of ability to overcome challenges with friends, right? How great does your team feel when the 5 of you take down another team that's really good, and you didn't think you were going to, right? You're gonna get a lot of very cool, good vibes from that, and you're gonna get them more so if the reason you logged on in the first place was to play with your friends.
Yeah.
So I absolutely think that if I was like looking at the motivations on why people play Unite, I would say it would probably be a different set. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
The competitive nature would be more of it. I'm sure the de-stress thing would still be there. The hanging out with friends things would still be there, but there would be other stuff that I haven't even thought of.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
we
you
said
would.
outside friends and exercise. I mean, I think it gives me a lot of exercise when I continue to throw my controller against the wall over and over again. So that's
Bash my
that's
head
what I'd be getting. Yeah, just if I'm just
my
bashing my head
Fitbit
in,
says
yeah.
I'm doing work when I'm
Yeah,
banging my head on the table.
I got a lot of steps. It said my heart rate's increasing. I'm doing cardio.
Well, the cool thing about that is you can see, like, if people that log on if to be competitive, are they the one that ends up throwing their keyboard? Or like the people who log on to hang
Yeah.
out with their friends, they're like, oh, whatever, I still hung out with my friends. I still got something, I still accomplished my goal or whatever. So
It relates to the role you play. I read a paper on that recently because I'm writing another script for another video, and I was looking at carry roles versus like support or defender roles. And that it has actually been found. Like if you play a carry, you're more confident in your decision making, like you feel like you should be in charge. And if you're, the one that's supposed to be in charge, like you tend to be more authoritative in just your personality in general.
Yep.
And then if you play like support or defender, you tend to be like more democratic in your leadership. Which that was interesting for me. But yeah, I think that's exactly kind of what was seen.
Yeah, and I would say that a lot of that's probably pre-selected. I mean, like the people who are authoritative are more likely to take on the leadership spot in the first place, etc.
Yeah. They like want to pick the jungler because they want to be the one that's in charge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue into the upcoming works section. You have a couple papers coming up, Kyle, if you want to ask about that.
Yeah, so I know we kind of touched on the one paper. Mindhack says Lane Cinder forever.
Real.
So
Lane
I guess
support Cinder.
Lane support Cinder. It's a choice and it's not terrible, I guess. Yeah, I think really just the upcoming works. I mean, talk to us about, what's remaining on that one, kind of methods, and walk us through like the methods. I know you touched on, the downloading of the app on the phone. I guess where are we? When can we be expected to get some publishing?
It's really soon, actually. I just finished the methods paper today.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, thanks. So it'll get submitted probably this week. And it's basically a tutorial for other people that want to do this research and have no idea on how to do it. There are so many like high level papers that like when you do a study like this, make sure you think about this and make sure you think about that. It's like very global. And we wrote kind of a very nuts and bolts paper on like this is what you do. This is how you get people in the study. This is how you put the apps on their phone. This is what they're going to complain about. This is how your server is going to crash and you're going to think everything is ruined. Like in a more professional terminology, we kind of just wrote a paper because we want other people to do stuff. Like if people are into Unite or into other games, we want them to be able to do this kind of work or whatever game that they play and they're interested in science. We want them to be able to get into it and do it and not have the technology stuff be the thing that kind of prevents them because the study gets deep in the weeds, man. It's not just put an app on somebody's phone and collect the data. Like we got over a terabyte of individual Unix text lines.
Dang.
So
which is a big number.
That's a lot of.
That's a big number. 10 to the 12th.
Yeah, a whole computer worth of single line text entries. And trying to make sense of that requires some very heavy computer programming, lifting, and math doing to even get it to a point where you can even ask it a question. So that's what kind of that whole paper is about. And then the second paper is just we wanted to be sure that we were right about this. There have been a lot of study. Husky mentioned it. There have actually been a pretty large amount of studies on Pokemon Go, but none of them have used objective measures of both gameplay and distance traveled. And so we were able to do that, and we have the results. I have started writing that paper. It's probably about a month from being done. I got a lot of people to think when that comes down, but it took us 3 or 4 years to do that. But it's results that I feel confident even before review. I feel pretty confident in just because we have so many data points and coupling that with multi-level modeling that I can say pretty confidently that if you play Pokemon Go on a regular basis, that you're gonna get a small incremental benefit to your life.
At least in some way.
You heard it here.
So it doesn't. So what the studies don't say is it doesn't cure. We're very clear about this. It won't cure your depression. I was very careful in the wording. It will not cure anything, but
it will not cure anything. But it will make your day. But I can say for sure that it will make you feel like you have more energy, and it will actually usually result in you talking to your friends more and talking to strangers more. And generally speaking, with humans, it's a good thing. So there are way worse ways for you to be spending your time.
All right, last question. Excel or R or SPSS?
Yes.
Good answer.
We clean and organize and sort in Excel.
Same.
We run the basics in SPSS. And then we have R do all the heavy lifting.
I am just saying letters.
I think you're just speaking another language.
You know, Microsoft Excel, the greatest coding language ever written.
We do multi-level modeling with an add-on to SPSS that's called Amos.
Oh, good.
Yeah, more letters for the chat.
Yeah.
More letters.
I love Microsoft Excel. And I learned R in a statistics class, and I have a computer engineering degree, but I don't understand programming at all, and I understand R really well, which is nice.
Yeah, it's the most powerful, least user-friendly
exactly
package that exists.
Yeah, 100%. That's all. That's all. Yeah. That's all I have. I just wanted to be a nerd about Microsoft Excel.
The only other question from chat, if anybody has any final questions, the only other question that we haven't answered. You talked about how some people, while playing Pogo, feel like they were able to break social norms by talking to strangers. How can we get strangers to stop talking to us when playing Pokemon Go?
It was a great question. And someone suggested barking, but for me, that's not going to deter me.
Do you want the real answer or the funny answer? Because my answer, as Kyle knows, is to yell at people, which I have done and will continue to do.
Like 2 weeks ago, you did.
Yeah.
It's very unbecoming of you, or whatever you said.
The real answer is to reinforce those unwritten rules that that person forgot about. Somebody gets close to you and starts talking to you, just look at them and be like, I'm sorry, I did not invite you to this conversation. And I guarantee they will stop talking to you.
They'll probably feel so weird about it. If I tried to talk to someone and they were like, I did not invite you to this conversation.
Well, not the anime voice.
I would never talk to a single person. That's what they would sound like. That's what they would sound like.
They do sound like that a lot of
times. A very polite get away from me is actually much more effective than kind of just like yelling or screaming or doing anything like that. Just be like, oh, I'm sorry. I don't want to talk to you. People are just like, okay.
It would work. It would be effective. Tell them you don't speak English. Yeah, tell it to them in English. Who asked you to speak?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I guess the only other thing I'm gonna drop. You do have an email address that you said I can share because it is forward facing. So if anybody does have any science related questions, feel free to email Patrick, ask him questions. He's not a medical doctor, so please don't send him any medical questions. It's a very different type of doctor.
I'll ask you politely not to talk to me.
Just an email response, no. Heart.
But no, and if you're watching this, later or on demand or whatever, researchers are always happy to talk about their research. So if you want to ask me something or you want to read my paper, I'll send you my paper too. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah, we love doing that.
No, we sure do.
Does Pokemon Go still work if my phone is stuck up my butt? I think you need to go to a doctor if that's the case.
Yeah, that's a medical doctor question.
I would prefer that if you did not talk to me.
Please leave me alone.
Please leave it at that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I think we've kind of exhausted the sheet that we've had, talked about all the papers, but before we kind of get going, just want to get final thoughts from both of y'all. If there's anything either of you want to plug, but we'll start with Husky. Any final thoughts before we get on over?
No, I think I did a great job of interrupting Patrick while he was speaking to say my thoughts. So, I think I've about covered everything I need to cover. Follow me on Twitch and YouTube. If you like research content, then that's what I do on YouTube.
Patrick.
My final thought would be that like we spend Husky mentioned this earlier, but a lot of time we spend time writing our papers for other scientists to read. And that's not why I write my papers. I write it for people who actually play the games, and I kind of go out of my way to make them readable. So honestly, like talking to you all and having people interested in the chat is really important to me, and it's why I continue to do this work. And it's not for me to get a raise or anything like that. I do it because I like doing it, and I want all of you that actually play the game to read it and know what it says and know how this stuff is affecting you. So thanks for your attention.
Absolutely. Alrighty, folks. Well, we are going to go ahead and conclude the day. Thank you both for joining me. And we are going to go ahead and raid on out, but we will say goodbye and until next time, and we'll catch y'all.